Good afternoon to you once again, my dear friends. Hopefully you are doing fine over this particular lockdown. I believe my God is not deaf. Everything will come into normal situation. So today we are going to continue where we ended in the last periods, where we were trying to discuss some issues and concepts related to research methodology as one of the chapter in the process of preparing our research proposal. We described some important elements that a research methodology has, and we said within the research methodology, we expect to find the so-called the study sites. We said we have the research design. We will have issues of data correction methods. We'll have data analysis, validity, and the reliability of the findings and the methods that were used for data correction. We'll have issues of ESCO consideration and the scope of the studies. And far, we went discussing one parameter after the other. The last classes was about the study sites, where we tried to explain as what are the important elements, what are the important informations a researcher is expected to explain and to show while preparing the documents on part related to study sites. We described each of the elements, the parameters, with vivid examples on how we can present it in a practical scenario. So this part has already gone. Today, we are going to discuss on the second part of the research methodology, which is now goes by the names of the research design. It is one of the sections under the research methodology which had a lot of complications in which most of its informations are overlapping. They overlap each other. Sometimes when you read the practical definitions of what we call a research design, could simply reflect of what we refer to as data correction methods. And such kind of overlapping mechanism might have providing some difficultness among us to understand what is exactly should be written on the research design while preparing the documents on our research proposal. So for sure, the research design, this was one of the sections which had some more inconsistency in my go through the start of research. It had some lot of complications that in fact, it was so difficult to me by then to conceptualize as in which element should be written in this particular section. Such a kind of difficultness that I experienced those days might have with you to the moments. So I am going to discuss about the research design. What are the important information a researcher should explain, should write, and should show while describing the so-called research design, and how exactly this research design could be well structured and presented in a document ready for the assessments while preparing your research proposal. Therefore, after we had make about the research design, then we would go for the research data correction, which will be the next class. So let's today go to what we are planning to discuss. I will make it very practical. I will have a short historical background about it, and I will go direct to the pre-practical examples from which you will understand more and more. And I have tried to use this social-based research examples, of which it included most of some of the relevant elements of which one could expect to be observed under the research design. Now, when we were looking on this research study sites, we observed all these issues, the last class of which I won't go back describing. Rather, today let's discuss about what is a research design. In this today's presentation, we are going to highlight some important issues, particularly on what is a research design, what are the information that should be observed under the research design, what are the important elements a researcher should consider to be documented in a Word document or whatever kind of information that should appear on the so-called research design. Wow, how can we present these elements? How can we present these important elements in a research design while preparing our documents? And what are the research approaches which bring about the guiding mechanism for the choice of a particular research design? We will highlight these issues. We are going to see about qualitative, quantitative, and pragmatism as types of this research design, which are commonly in use. We will have to look about the population and targeted populations. These are some of the information that should be well placed and written on the research design. We expect information related to sample and sample size under this research design. We expect to see information related to sampling frame, sampling intensity, and the unit of analysis. We expect to see some information related to sampling techniques. Which sampling techniques you as a researcher, you are going to employ, you are going to adopt in the process of sampling and sample preparation. Are you going to use the so-called probability sampling? Then, under probability sampling, which techniques is in fact gonna be implemented? Is it simple random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, stratified, or multiple stage sampling? Sometimes we need to use the so-called non-probability sampling. These are some of the strategies that a researcher should give out clear from the beginning before even he has gone to the field for data correction. So in the study, in the research design, this information should be clearly indicated and well elaborated for proper directivity of how you are going to perform your work. Without this kind of information, for sure, your research proposal under the research design, which is a most important section, as it will be describing each and every perspectives regarding your procedures and activities as a researcher you're going to do in the field. So under probability sampling, whether you use the so-called convenience sampling, purposive sampling, voluntary sampling, snowball sampling, or quota sampling. These are some of the sampling techniques that a researcher should either use one or two of them, depending on the nature of the study. The details are about on how can we do simple sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, stratified, convenient, and whatever. I will have a different class, independent class, describing each of these parameters. So then I'm going just highlighting, giving dialect to how do we write this research design in a practical way. So without wasting time, let us have a simple understanding as what is a research design. Generally, when we speak of the research design, is nothing rather this refers to the conceptual structure which describes the overall mechanism or procedure and the activities that a researcher has to do before, during, and even after the process of data correction. So a researcher has to set up some mechanisms prior for the data correction, during the data correction, and after the data correction, preparing yourself for the data analysis. So the mechanisms, procedures, and the activities that a researcher should in fact tell are what we do by the so-called research design. Research design, it constitutes the blueprints, arrangements of the necessary condition for data correction, analysis, in such a way that they combine relevant informations for the purpose of that particular research. And the research should be performed in an economy style. Without having these blueprints, you will lost it somewhere. So you might be not getting properly what I'm trying to speak, but to a typical examples that I'm going to provide you, you will understand it properly as what do we mean by a research design and how does it differ from data collection method, how does it differ from analysis, and how does it differ from a study sites, and how does it be prepared in a document. Therefore, it is the research design that facilitates and provides the most savings of the process of data correction, data manipulation, data analysis, and the handling of the entire population from which you are going to make your study. How are you going to sample? Which criteria have you decided as a guiding mechanism for your sampling protocol? Then we had also to look on this particular aspect, as I said, that the research design, the overall decision on which kind of the research design to be undertaken will depend on the approach from which a researcher has adopted or has to adopt. There are several approaches, as I said. Some of the common approaches of which we use, and I am going to use as an example today, though there are other approaches depending on the criteria from which a researcher has to be undertaken, but common ones which are neutral and probably known to most of us are the qualitative approach, quantitative approach, and the pragmatic approach, the mixed approach. The use of whether quantitative, and qualitative, pragmatic, what are these? What does it mean? What is inside? I'm not going to explain it deep under this particular class. I will make it another class. If you want it, you will get understand. But I'm sure for today, you simply understand these are some of the research approaches of which the researcher should adopt one or two or whatever, depending on the nature of the study. And each of the approach have some principle behind to guide. And when you are, for example, when you are applying for this qualitative research, we are assuming that you are going to use the research questions, and most of your informations are totally descriptives, explanatories in nature, and then going to assess some person's feelings, attitudes, and other related parameters with no or less manipulation of numerical values. But when we are going to use the quantitative approach, we are assuming that most of our data are going to be in form of numerical values. Some statistical and mathematical parameters are going to be in use. And in fact, it's going to use a so-called hypothesis rather than static questions. And then we have the pragmatic, which uses either of the two depending on the nature, with the assumption that each of these have some weakness. Therefore, to minimize those kind of weakness, I use the mixed approach, from which I use multiple ways of data correction for the study, from which we have different things the study research designs. Depending on the nature of the approach that a researcher is going to use, we have different types of this research design. We have those rooted from the quantitative research design, from which we have those based with the so-called experimental based research design, and we have the non-experimental based research design. Under experimental, we have the true experimental research design, the quasi-experimental design, pre-test and post-test experimental design. Under the non-experimental design, but uses some numerical values and use some hypotheses to verify the causal relationship between variables, We have the so-called comparative study design, survey design, correlation design, cross-sectional design, longitudinal design, and others. On the other side, on the so-called qualitative, we have the case study design, documentation design, narrative design, evaluative design, action research design, ethnography design, phenomenology design, oral historical design, simple survey design, and others. On the pragmatism, we could expect things like the so-called explanatory research design, transformative research design, convergent research design, and divergent research design, and other modes. These are some of the design that I'm trying to show that we have a variety of research design. So the use of a particular research design will depend on the nature of the study and the intention of the question that has been asked within a study itself. So each of these kind of research design, they are trying to give informations while you are trying to light information related to kind of approach should be observed. The design itself should be well explained with and why. While trying to tell that I am going to use this kind of research design, you should give reason why, with what, supports by one. You give out the procedures, the activities, or the experimental layout for these experimental related studies on how you are going to do. Show the sampling procedures to be adopted and why that particular sampling procedures has been adopted in that particular study. Therefore, those are some of the relevant information of which I found it's very important for us to have a highlight on it. Then let us now go direct to a practical examples. How do we write a research design in a document ready for submission for your proposals? How do we write? What are the components should be included? As I tried to highlight, we are going to see them in a practical way. Let's look some of the examples on how we practically present a research design on a particular document. Look this is the document now. This is the document. How do we write it in a document ready for submission? Remember, there are several formats that exist on how to write this. But I have tried to use a numbering format of which it will be giving you relevant informations. What kind of information should appear under what style, to whom, well, all those things. I've tried to use the numbering so that it becomes easier for you to capture. Numbering or non-numbering will depend on the institution or the organization format, but for sure, I ask you, you just follow your directions given by your institutions, whether you use numbering or non-numbering, section and subsections, or others. So I am going to share with you the typical examples on this particular area. But for sure, as usual, as the rule of thumb, please don't ignore, subscribe my YouTube and share, because the kind of knowledge that I'm trying to share will be relevant somewhere and be useful for your academic achievements. So support my matter, and please you visit my YouTube by typing Research Techniques by Marunguja. So from this, I am going to share now the relevant areas from which you can be in the position of describing these issues in a practical way. Yes. This is a document from which we are going to see the practical applicability and how do we present this research design in a writing and a practical way. Suppose this is my title. I've tried to use social-based examples such that it becomes easy for everyone to understand. I found when I use these experimental based examples from which I belong, it might be bring some overlapping of some information, compressions, and the complexity of which you cannot understand in a proper. But when I use these social studies examples, will be proper and relevant for you to capture and make follow. Suppose this is my title. I'm intending to make a study on the improving the quality of science education in junior schools, intending to see the stakeholders' perspectives, issues, and promising practices. And therefore, I have taken just a section of the so-called the research design, which is our today's presentation. The last class was on the study side, of which I named it as 3.1. Today is 3.2 as a second section within this research methodology. So on this particular area, I will have 3.2.1, the first sections under the research design. Though the numbering and the sequentialization may vary from one format to another. So today I'm going just to see how do we in fact do, what kind of information is required, how do we write in a practical way. So suppose the first section is the research approach. How do we present this? So you simply write, they propose this study, for example now, they propose this study will adopt a pragmatic approach, which embraces the pragmatic view according to this one and this one, in identifying the functioning systems of the educational context. The selectivity of this design is not just a matter of free choice. Rather, it is determined by the nature of the study, including research assumption and the methods that are under preference, supposed by this particular citation. Pragmatisms reject the idea of aligning to a single research and provide to a single research paradigms. So I said pragmatic paradigm is the mixed kind of approach, which assumes the use of either of the two approach. So this guy is trying to use this kind of approach and now is trying to defend why he has decided to use that particular design. That's why I said, whenever you select a particular design approach or design, you should give up the reason behind as why you have selected that particular, with whom has been supported your arguments. You see, he says, this design, it opened the door for multiple methods to be used together, accommodating a diverse worldview, allowing different forms of data collection, different categories and source of data, and different forms of data analysis according to these particular ones. This study will employ comparative, non-experimental, and a cross-sectional research design. Why this one? The choice of this research design will help, and we have observed that will help to collect data to a participant at low cost. And this information also had been declared by Devers 2001. The purpose of this design is to provide better understanding of the research. Fine. So we have tried to show which approach gonna be used in this particular state and what kind of the design the researcher has provided an evidence, supportive evidence to favor his study. That was one section within the research design. This other section is about, we expect to see information related to the population. Then The proposed study will involve junior secondary schools. That is my population. Students in these schools will be categorized in age-wise between either 13 to 20. Mode of living, those living in boarding and day. Level of education, ordinary level and advanced levels. In each school, 5 categories. You see, he is trying to explain what exactly is going to do. 5 categories of respondent will be involved. Because at school, when you go to school, find a lot of respondents. So he is trying to tell us what are the respondents gonna be under considered. He said 5 categories. He will have this head of schools, will have science teachers, will have students, he will have parents and science alumni that will be living closer to that particular schools of which he is going to start. So here we have seen that we have schools, the teachers, and the schools will have the teachers, head of schools, students, parents, and alumni around those schools. But we don't know exactly what amount, what number are we going to question? Are we going to question everybody who is there? No. So this is trying to show about the population that we are going to visit. Then after you go to the sample size, you need to be specific. How many head teachers, how many science teachers, how many students, how many parents, how many alumni that are found in that, and under what particular reason behind. Now we have category number 3, the sample size. Here, in doing research, it's difficult to engage the entire population, targeted population. Instead, sub known as a sample is to be undertaken as representatives in the entire process of data acquiring. In the proposed study, a total of 64 respondents will be included. But remember, this 64 is the whole from which we should know how many teachers. Here I said 20, of which 25 will be teachers. 24 will be students. 12 will be parents. And 4 will be head of schools. The general rules, how he came out with the decision about these numbers. The general rules as provided by Cohen 2000 was the one and considered in the decision on the number of these students, where he believed that 30% of the population has to be considered in the sample across the selected categories. And based on the sampling style, will determine the number of this sample size. And so far, we have also some formulas from which we can use as the ways on how we can determine the sample size. I will use another examples next time to use some formulas on how we can determine the sample size. But for today, I'm trying to show you how can we write this. Then after the sample size, we go to the so-called sampling procedures. How now is going to have this 24, 4 kind of teachers, 12 parents. Now you go to this concept of sampling procedures. This information should appear on the so-called research design. So according to Caswell and Cracker 2007, recommended that participants who have experience with phenomena under the study can be selected to give some needed information. This study will employ or will involve several categories of respondent groups. Therefore, to obtain sample, different sampling technique. Catch this. So to obtain the sample, so different sampling technique will be used. The study will employ the use of simple random sampling design, sampling, purposive sampling, And to some extent, I will employ stratified sampling where applicable. You see, how do we get the idea and the use of this probability sampling, I don't know, random sampling, purposive sampling is supported by this particular literature. What the activities is the researcher going to do, in fact, to get this and make sampling? So that's I said, this information on how the researcher is going to be used and implemented to acquire this is as follows. One, how the selection of the school. All the schools for this study will be purposefully selected from district capital in town. So first, he needed to select the schools. Therefore, he is going to select only 4 schools, of which will be purposefully selected. We know what is purposefully selection, that you select based on your interest. That is purposive kind of sampling. Therefore, if you find some difficulty on understanding this, I will have a specific class to explain each of these sampling techniques. Selection of the respondents. How am I going to find these respondents? Given the consistency of times and the resource, purposively and the multi-level sampling will be used, assessed to be with less costive. So to him, he said, selection of this respondent also, he will use purposive. The number of students, the parents, and whatever, he will use purposive and the multi-level sampling. That were the reason, the sampling techniques. The reason behind for that particular is because of low costs. And he says, we pointed out the idea behind purposive sampling in different rounds of sampling. Why? It involves selecting of the sample of which is rich in the information. So he was trying to use purposive sampling, intending to acquire sample of the group with insufficient information pertaining to the kind of his study. That's why he was trying to use this. He proposed to use this purposive sampling. Then how are we going to get these students? You need to explain each and every parameter so sequential, such that it is free from any ambiguity. Then from this, you can also see how the students were selected, how science teachers were selected, how the head of schools were selected, and how the parents were selected, and what was, this is the other section within which, what was the plan of data collection and analysis. You should also give the plan behind that I will do 1, 2, 3. For instance, here, the data collection process will be divided into 2 phases. You see, he is trying to show that at the end of the day, no one is ignorant about what is exactly expecting to do, to go and performed in the field. So such kind of information about sampling, sample size, what kind of the population are you going to do, what design are you going to implement, they are trying to explain about the so-called the research design. From here, you can pause the video and read how he will do with the first phase, how he will do with the second phase, and what would the reason for making phases in the process of data collection. And here I say the choice of these phases was simply to anticipate some of the information that were not acquired during the first phase. See, so research design is a broad, a general descriptions giving the overall ideas on how a researcher is going, in fact, to do. trying to convince and explain each in a sequential way such that it provides no ambiguity for the readers to understand when what is actually gonna be implemented. From here, I can speak that everything now has been tried to be condensed in a simple ways on where you can catch and understand the relevant informations. I will planning to use another examples, but with times this is enough for you today to conceptualize and understand practically how do we do when we speak of the so-called the research design. Once again, thank you for your attention, and I ask you to subscribe. The more I get subscribers, the more I get eager to work and more to know that I am trying to help populations of my fellows. Thank you once again. Good evening.